Hello, my name is John Peace with the Rural Route Newsletter, and I'm here today with our special guest, Sarah June, with the Neighborly Online Magazine. And I'm going to let Sarah June introduce herself. Also, pronounce her last name because I always have a little problem with that. So I'm going to be respectful and let you do it for me. Okay. Sarah June,
All
there you go.
right. Yes, sir. So I'm Sarah June Nottestad, and I started a small news magazine online in Southwest Virginia here, specifically for Grayson and Carroll County and the city of Galax. I live in Galax, and Galax is just north of Mount Airy, North Carolina. So we're
Andy
about,
Griffith territory, just north
that's
of,
right.
yeah.
We're 30 minutes north of Mount Airy, and we're a town of about 6,000. And as we all know, the journalism across rural America is having some setbacks. Newsrooms are shrinking, conglomerates are coming in and buying up newspapers. And with my experience writing and publishing for the last 7 years or so, I saw a need in this region to bring some of my skills to the street here. So I started the Neighborly. You can find the Neighborly at www.swvacountry.com. We're a publication that focuses on a lot of the human interest stories of the region, getting our events and updates, business announcements out there ahead of time so people can plan their calendars and help join the community with celebrating different things. And because it's an online, it's not a print bound publication, I can quickly turn around news and updates the same day or the next day for area churches, youth groups, school activities, our chamber of commerce and our small towns and, 4-H and FFA, that kind of stuff.
Well, Sarah June, one thing, we're glad you started it. Trust me. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I live in Big Stone Gap, Virginia, which probably from you, we're even further in Southwest Virginia, but instead of on the North Carolina border, we're on the Kentucky border up in the coal fields. So when we say Southwest Virginia, it's about the size of New Jersey. If you look at the territory, go west of Roanoke, Virginia and stuff. But anyway, Sarah and I first met when you were doing some writing for the Barn Raiser magazine. We'll plug in just for a little bit because they've been great guys. Not only um, we're publishing some articles I've done, and of course you've done several with them now.
Yeah, it's funny because I was doing some research for some other work reporting that I was doing, and I'd done a Google search, and all of this data came out of something that you wrote for Barn Raiser, and I was like, "Hey, I gotta talk to this guy. He's just down the road from me." So that's I initiated reached out to you because I was like, you were speaking my language in that article that I read in Barn Raiser, and they've been wonderful to support the work in rural places around the country.
Well, we're glad. One thing when I first talked to you about what I kind of wanted to do on writing articles, which we'll talk about the one you just released here recently, here in a minute, stuff, was I grew up, one of my favorite shows, even when I was a youngster, maybe I was an oddball, was you remember Charles Kuralt on the road?
Yes, I do. I do.
Yeah. I love that show, and he would stop by and just talk about these oddball characters. Kind of reminds me now, American Pickers has kind of took that, and I mean, it was Charles Kuralt, back in the day. The only thing he didn't buy junk. He did interviews, and I miss that. And then also, I grew up because I grew up on a dairy farm, and in our milking parlor, we had a radio, and we listened to the radio while we milked cows. And one of the things on, I forgot, can't remember if it was every 2 hours or on the hour, one every hour, but our local radio station would play Paul Harvey,
Yes.
the rest of the story. And I can remember my granddad would just kind of sit around there and he'd get done and he would kind of straighten his pants up and go, "What about that?"
Exactly.
You learn
We
something,
Yeah, that was always sitting in our kitchen. We had Paul Harvey would come on around noon or 11 in the morning or something, and you could just kinda sit and listen to his voice tell this little insight or thoughtful thing, and that was always part of our world also. Right, and you know what? It's kind of funny because I can't think of Paul Harvey without remembering some of the news jingles of the local businesses, like the jewelry store paid for a little jingle to go on the radio right after Paul Harvey. Every time you heard Paul Harvey, it would be followed up by the local jewelry store jingle that they had going. And
Wow.
so I don't know, it's kind of that funny, like back in the 70s, early 80s, remembering that how much radio was so much a robust part of being growing up in a rural place.
Yeah, and one thing, and this is what I'm so tickled to death about your online magazine doing future articles, because I really miss the rural, just the cultural articles, the stories, because now, everything's crime, the clickbait stuff, politics, crime, sports. Okay. 90%. And, used to, we grew up in an era where journalism, that newspaper would do these character stories or do these background stories with historical reference. And we just don't have that today. And that's one
Yeah.
thing and I have to tell this funny story about when I wrote my first book. It's a boy called Boy from Cracker's Neck. And it was really about my granddad growing up during the Great Depression and was a World War II B-17 bomber pilot and his peers that were World War II. And if he was alive when I released that book, he would have said, "Son, nobody's going to spend hard-earned money to hear these hillbilly stories." It's a lot of just hillbilly stories that I heard growing up. And what's been such a pleasant surprise, I released the book, and we'll talk about the article here in just one second. And I've gotten tremendous response from this article, and it's just a hillbilly story, a mountain cultural story. And growing up, I didn't even know these were traditions. I just thought they were everywhere. And of course you're in Iowa. You had the same different local traditions.
Yeah, and I think too that these stories, like what you're in your book, A Boy from Cracker's Neck,
Hmm.
in that book, we're kind of this bridge generation from a rural tradition that's really gone away or going away. And so to reach a wider audience, this is interesting for people to remember these stories that are actually part of all of us. And just so you know, 100 years ago, the US Census puts rural population at about 55%. In like
Hmm.
1910, 55% of Americans were rural. And today, I have to just say this, our US Census says we're at 20%.
Yeah, and dropping.
And the truth of that the US Census puts that number at 20%, but they also are including really rich people who live in those big estates outside of urban areas. So when you look at rural in the terms of having access to services like transportation, healthcare, that number is really 14%. You and I both come from a rural experience in that 14%, access to services, access to health,
Hmm.
medical care, and that kind of stuff. So when you go from 55% 110 years ago to 14%, what the stories that you remember from your childhood, from your great grandmother, and she was born in the 1890s. This is part of we're a bridge generation to that story.
Well, that leads perfectly. Let's talk about, I wrote the article, Why Appalachians Ate Chicken and Dumplings for Thanksgiving. And let me give you a little bit of my personal experience. I remember my great grandmother. That was always a dish. Either in the morning, she'd fix it early, and sometimes we'd come in for milking cows, or it was a dish at Thanksgiving. Okay. And so I grew up just thinking, and you always had that on Thanksgiving. And then later on in my life, and this is a funny story I didn't write about. I should put it in there. I can remember going up to my son's grandparents' house for Thanksgiving, and I was in, how you get in line to get the food in the kitchen. You work your
Yeah.
way around the counter, and then you go into the dining room. And I was sitting in. His papa was right in front of me. He said, "Son," he said, "you better grab all the chicken and dumplings you want right now, because he said there'll be leftover turkey, but they ain't never no leftover chicken and dumplings." And I can just remember that, and it was so true that it got cleaned,
Yeah,
and yeah, and
you
we
have
like
to go.
turkey, but not like chicken and dumplings.
No.
And then, okay, so I grew up just thinking, well, everybody did chicken and dumplings at Thanksgiving, kind of like pumpkin pie to us. Well, I went to Virginia Tech, and I needed a humanities class. This is the only reason why I ended up in this class. It was a history of the Appalachians. Okay. And I'm like, well, I'm from the Appalachians. This ought to be an easy A, keep my GPA, keep my scholarship. Okay. And so we're in that class, and we start getting into regional traditions, folklore, and it had a lot of different aspects, but the traditions. And one was I can remember he's talking about a regional dish was Thanksgiving or Christmas, but Thanksgiving in particular, chicken and dumplings. And I'm like, what do you mean? I thought everybody. So that was the first time, 18, 19 years old, before I find out that was something special that only we did necessarily. And then of course, then the article would go into the history of it and about poor mountain folks and about how turkeys was something that was not regionally grown. And then I don't know about you, I turkey hunted a lot when I was young. I've got family members that love turkey hunting and stuff, but I never really liked eating wild turkey. It was gamey. I thought it was stringy and wasn't my favorite dish. I don't know whether you've ever had it.
Yeah, isn't that whenever you're eating wild bird fowl, when you're eating that, like dad or my husband bringing home bird, don't you I don't know, I always ran into a lot of buckshot. Isn't that what that's called?
Yep, a lot of it
Fowl?
can be. Yep, you have to watch out or you'll break a tooth.
Yeah.
So then, in the class, and then of course I write a little bit about it in the article, was the history about poor folks in the mountains, especially in the mountains, couldn't afford a turkey. They didn't normally raise turkeys. So, but what they did have was chickens. And my great grandmother, let me tell you, she had her prized chicken. In fact, in my book, I talk about how she was on the front page of our local newspaper in the early 1900s because she shot a mountain lion with her little pistol because the mountain lion was in there killing her chickens.
I don't blame her. I'd be pissed as all get out.
Yeah, I know. And trust me, she carried a little pistol with her. I mean, but anyway, she 4 foot nothing. And we called her little grand. She carried a pistol. But anyway, her prize chicken. But that was part of that mountain tradition of fixing chicken and dumplings because they had chicken. And
Yeah.
dumplings was easy to make, flour is cheap to make, cheap.
Yes.
So
We my family had, I just would like to just add the dumplings. I was remembering dumplings. Ours was cooked with hamburger. So, like, we would have beef and not the chicken with the dumplings. Ours was in a beef base. But, like, out where I'm from in Iowa and Minnesota, out in the plains area, we had I don't know, there was always someone with a cow, and at the end of the season, you finish and dress the cow, and then you would share that beef, and then beef was used during the winter months. That was what we would have in wintertime for with our meals, and like a beef stew with dumplings and that kinda stuff, which we out in the Midwest, we call them dumplings.
yeah. And I thought about when I wrote the title, leaving the G out and put the apostrophe dumplings. I probably should have, but anyway, I went ahead and put the G in there and make it proper. But anyway, I should have done the apostrophe and made it a little bit
Well,
more.
I'm neighborly, I can do that really quickly for you, and it'll look like dumplings if you would rather.
We might change. I got to thinking about it, and I'll be honest with you. I think I might have typed it that way, and the auto, the spell check thing changed it for me and all that, and I didn't catch it. But and also I want to talk about my next article, and I hope you're going to put it out there. Is Thanksgiving without vinegar pie,
Yes, tell me
and
about that. The heck is vinegar pie?
vinegar pie. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about the history of vinegar pie. It's going to be my article. They'll have some links to the exact history of it and the research of it. But now let me tell you, I never, to my memory, ever had vinegar pie. Okay. But I remember my great grandmother talking about it. Maybe it was my granddad asked about vinegar pie or one of his brothers asked about vinegar pie. And first of all, let's tell the viewer what vinegar pie is. The article hadn't come out yet. Okay. Mountain folk, and especially all this goes from West Virginia down to Western North Carolina into the Great Smokies. During the early 1900s, poor people, food was scarce, and also money was a non-existent. So you fed people with what you had, and vinegar pie was a substitute for lemon pie because I remember my grandmother when she told the story about vinegar pie. She said back before Paul made union wages, before the UMWA, we had to eat vinegar pies. And vinegar was a substitute for lemon juice. And lemons were either a rare non-existence in this part of America, or you just couldn't afford them. Even if the store had them, you couldn't buy them. And so my great grandmother, no, she was born 1995. When she would talk about her life, she would separate her life into two different time periods. One was before the Union, before the UMWA, and those were hard times, poor times, and hungry times. She talked about those were vinegar pie times. And once Paul UMWA came in, earned them some wages, some living wages. She's talked about how she never had to make vinegar pie again, and she wasn't going back.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
That's
and,
amazing.
I wrote the article talking about, what the union did for working people, and even if you weren't in the union, it raised everybody's wages,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. And I think too, yeah, it's really, yeah, that's such a neat story. And how to go from want to being able to satisfy your own needs, but also to go to getting real the sugar for the pie and having real lemon juice for the pie. That's a privilege right there.
and I can remember another story, and I put this in my first book, Boy from Cracker's Neck. We were at church one day, and the preacher was talking about the good old days, and talking about how we need to get back to the good old days. Well, he made a mistake after church because he asked my grandmother, my great grandmother, little granny, about what she thought of the sermon, thinking, oh, she'd like all that talk about the good old days and going back to the good old days. And she said, preacher, she said, you're just too young and don't know what you're talking about. She goes, I got a good memory and I remember the good old days. And I remember the good old days you're talking about before the union, for the UMWA. And she gave him an example. She said, I've lived to see bread being a nickel in the store. And at the time, she said it's $1.50 at the time. This was probably late 70s, early 80s. It's $1.50 at the store. And she said, I much prefer the times at $1.50. She goes, because of the UMWA wages and the UMWA retirement she was living off of, she said, I can slap my $1.50 down on the table or at the counter and check it out and buy the bread. Back when it was a nickel, I had to walk by it, preacher man, because I didn't have a nickel. She said, don't tell me about the good old days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah. I was gonna say too, I just wanna go back to, I made the comment about going from dumplings to dumplings.
Yes.
I just wanna say this is, I know, totally off the subject of what you just went into, but I wanted to say that, in up north, we call them cricks, and down
Yeah.
here, you call them creeks.
Creeks. Yep.
Creeks, and up there there's cricks. So about the regional language, there's all these there's differences, and there's not, if my family hears me call them dumplings, it's just gonna sound like I'm copying being in the South. So I have to just kind of do a disclaimer for that.
I know what they'd say you're outgrown your upbringing. I know
Thanks.
that.
There you go. And then, I think, when we were talking about food for holidays and Thanksgiving, and I was going back and remembering kind of the things that our family in the family traditions that we had, because we come from a similar background of the stories that you describe. Out of the Depression, we're more my families that I have were more of that Dust Bowl crowd
Mhm.
in the plain states, and we had chickens, and also holidays weren't really celebrated, like Thanksgiving, maybe there might have been something special, maybe something special for Christmas. A lot of times kids didn't get, there were no gifts in those days. That's before 2 generations before my time, frankly. I didn't grow up that way, of
Yeah,
course.
but it definitely influenced how we view holidays today. Because to me, my family today will talk about, well, you really don't get up for holidays. I said, well, I was telling my son this. I said, well, when you grew up on a dairy farm, Thanksgiving and Christmas was another day you milked the cows and fed the cows and did your work and stuff. And yeah, we celebrated it for the religious standpoint and stuff, but it wasn't like a holiday celebration like it is today.
That's
The
right.
celebrating part, you honored it on the religious side, but you didn't really celebrate it just as a party.
That's right, and I think looking back at our family, we had a lot of Germans and Swedes and Norwegians, so I know one thing that was really added to the meal was homemade noodles would have been part of the meal, but
Okay.
also, yeah, homemade noodles would be a special part of the meal. Also, we would have meatballs made from pork. So, meatballs with gravy and potatoes, and then also the other aspects of our meal out in the Midwestern area, fish. A lot of us descend from
Okay.
coastal people, whether it's Ireland, Norway, or Sweden. A lot of us are coastal people, and also we have a large population of African Americans who migrated from coastal regions. So ever since the early 18 fish caught in the sea was brought in through the Great Lakes in barrels, wooden barrels,
Salted.
and
Were they
salted
salted? Yeah,
or
I'm o okay.
salted or in a pickle brine.
What
And
let
this is and so, like, the country stores around the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, out into the Dakotas, could get in at around the holidays, a shipment of mackerel,
Uh-huh,
or 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 on the other hand, on the Scandinavian side, we would get dehydrated cod.
okay.
And so, whether you're Norwegian American or African American, having fish from the sea inland on the interior was a real treat. And
Well, let
so
me tell you a
that
quick family story of mine that relates to that. Now, my dad's family was from Hanover County, Virginia, and the geographic area of that is north of Richmond, flat country, along the Pamunkey River up there. And up there, they have a regional breakfast. And I'm going to do an article on it because I got to do a little bit of research on it, on saltfish breakfasts. They would it was spot what they call spot fish, salted, salt cured, and eggs. And I can remember staying up there one summer. My grandmother up there fixed it. She goes, "You want some saltfish and eggs?" And I was like, "For breakfast?" I mean, I had never thought about fish for breakfast, but it was wonderful. And I ate it, throughout my lifetime growing up and going to visit them. But I'm gonna kind of do some research. I like to do a story on that saltfish breakfasts. Yeah.
Yeah, so where I'm from, when the Scandinavians would import dehydrated cod fish, then you have to reconstitute it in salt water, and that is a dish that we would have at Thanksgiving and Christmas, basically in the winter
Wow.
months. And so that was and it was cheap, and all of the food I'm talking about, fish, rutabagas, all that kinda stuff, we would have a porridge that's flour and milk boiled
Okay.
together, maybe with a little cinnamon if you had it, maybe a little sugar if you had it. So this is all Depression era poor food.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But getting in a piece of the codfish from the Atlantic was a big deal, and we call it lutefisk.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of times our country church suppers around the holidays, we'd get together because you go in together to buy the lutefisk, then you prepare you reconstitute it together over the course of a few weeks, and then you all eat it together, and it tastes pretty it's not for the faint of heart.
Well, I'll tell you what, Surgeon, I promised I'd keep you under 30 minutes, but one last plug. I want you to plug your neighborly online magazine, and then we'll tell them to look for the article. So I'll let you go ahead and plug it one more time.
Yep, so if you look us up at www.swvacountry.com and join us at the Neighborly and subscribe and look forward to following some more stuff from John Peace.
Well, thank you, Surgeon. We'll be back. We got some more food stories to talk about. We definitely got coming up. I'll go ahead and tell people I want to do a few articles on Old Christmas. If you don't know what Old Christmas is, see, and this is sad for me because now when you say January 6th, everybody thinks of Washington D.C. and all that. But see, for us, January 6th is Old Christmas, and so we're going to talk a little bit about Old Christmas and some of the traditions all up through the mountains on Old Christmas and some of the stuff I kind of grew up with. I had neighbors that probably did more with it, but anyway, we'll talk about Old Christmas in the
I'm
mountains.
looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Appreciate it, John.
thank you, Sir June. Appreciate it. Bye bye.
Bye.